The rain came softly to the Oregon coast that November evening, the kind of gentle persistence that made Olivia Hart think of patience, of things that waited decades to arrive. She sat in her small cottage overlooking the gray-green Pacific, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside her laptop, when the doorbell rang with a sound that felt almost accusatory in the silence. The delivery driver was already retreating to his truck by the time she opened the door, leaving behind a weathered cardboard box marked with international postage stamps and the kind of tape that suggested it had traveled through many hands to reach her. No return address, just her name written in handwriting that made her breath catch somewhere between her throat and her heart. She knew that handwriting. She had known it 40 years ago when it filled the margins of research papers, when it scrawled equations on whiteboards at 3 in the morning, when it signed off on reports that changed how humanity listened to the cosmos. James Whitmore's handwriting hadn't changed. Even if everything else had, Olivia carried the box inside with trembling hands, setting it on her kitchen table like it might contain something fragile or explosive. Perhaps it contained both. She had not heard from James in 38 years, not since that April morning in 1986, when he had accepted a position with the European Space Agency and left California without saying the words she had waited months to hear. She had been 31 then, brilliant and careful, wearing her professional armor like a shield. He had been 33, ambitious and kind, and neither of them had been brave enough to admit what everyone else at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory already knew. The box contained 3 things. First, a letter written on actual paper, the kind of analog gesture that felt both outdated and intensely personal. Second, a small external hard drive labeled simply Arecibo Follow-Up Project, 2019-2024, Eyes Only. Third, a photograph she recognized immediately. The two of them standing in front of the Voyager Golden Record display at NASA headquarters, young and smiling, standing just slightly too close to be merely colleagues, yet not quite close enough to be anything more. She opened the letter first, unfolding the pages with the care of an archaeologist uncovering something that might crumble at the wrong touch. Olivia, I'm dying. The doctors give me perhaps 4 months, maybe 6 if I'm stubborn, which we both know I can be. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. I'm writing this from a small research facility outside Santa Fe, where I've spent the last 5 years, working on something I can't tell anyone about, except you. I know I have no right to contact you after so long. I know I left without explanation, without courage, without saying what I should have said when it mattered. I told myself it was for your career, that you deserved better than someone who would always put the work first, that you'd forget me within a year. I was wrong about everything except how brilliant you were. I've followed your papers, your patents, your work on deep space communication arrays. I'm not sure if that makes me a stalker or just a coward who couldn't let go. The hard drive contains data from a signal we detected 6 years ago. Not the kind of signal that makes headlines. This one has been classified, buried, denied by every government agency you can imagine. But it's real, Olivia. It's artificial, it's intentional, and it's directed at us. And after 6 years of trying, I can't decode it. Not alone. I need your mind. I need the techniques we developed together, back when we thought we could change the world just by listening carefully enough. I need the person who understood signal processing better than anyone I've ever met. But more than that, I need to see you again before I run out of time. I need to tell you what I should have said 40 years ago. If you come, you'll find me at the Whitmore Research Station, 30 miles outside of Santa Fe. Yes, I named it after myself. Some vanity persists even in dying men. If you don't come, I understand. I have no right to ask this of you, but I'm asking anyway. James Olivia read the letter 3 times. Her tea growing cold, the rain intensifying outside until it drummed against her windows like impatient fingers. 40 years. 40 years of a life carefully constructed around the absence of this man, around the hole he had left when he chose his ambition over whatever they might have been. She had married briefly in her 40s, a kind man, a good man, someone who deserved more than a wife who kept comparing him to a ghost. They had divorced amicably after 5 years, remaining friends, both admitting she had never fully been present in the relationship. She had told herself she was over James Whitmore. She had built a successful career in civilian aerospace, retired comfortably at 65, moved to this cottage where the ocean reminded her that the universe was vast enough to swallow old regrets. She had convinced herself that old flames eventually burned out completely, leaving nothing but ash and the faint memory of warmth. The letter proved her wrong. Olivia plugged in the hard drive with shaking hands, her old instincts awakening like muscle memory. The data appeared on her screen in formats she recognized immediately: spectral analysis, frequency decomposition, pattern recognition algorithms she had helped develop in the 1980s. But woven through the familiar was something else, something that made her pulse quicken with the old excitement she thought she had left behind. This wasn't random cosmic noise. This wasn't a pulsar or a quasar or any natural phenomenon she had spent her career cataloging. This was structured, intentional, complex. This was someone, something, trying to say hello to a universe that might not be listening, and James couldn't decode it alone. She sat back in her chair, staring at the rain-streaked window, at her reflection superimposed over the dark ocean beyond. She was 67 years old. She had built a peaceful life. She had learned to sleep without wondering what might have been. But James was dying, and the universe was trying to speak, and some part of her that had been dormant for 40 years suddenly remembered what it felt like to reach for something. Impossible. Olivia picked up her phone and began searching for flights to New Mexico. Some messages, she realized, take a lifetime to arrive, but that doesn't make them any less urgent when they finally do. The next morning, she locked up her cottage, left a note for her neighbor to water the plants, and boarded a plane heading east, toward the desert, toward the past, toward a dying man who had waited 40 years to say what they had both been too afraid to speak. The universe had sent a message. So had James, and this time, Olivia Hart was determined not to leave either one unanswered. The Whitmore Research Station looked nothing like Olivia had imagined. She had expected something clinical, something that screamed government facility or corporate research lab. Instead, James had built himself a refuge that looked more like an artist's retreat, a low adobe structure that seemed to grow from the red New Mexico earth, surrounded by satellite dishes and antenna arrays that pointed toward the sky like metal flowers seeking the sun. She arrived at sunset, the desert painted in shades of copper and gold, and found James sitting on the wide porch in a weathered wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket despite the lingering warmth of the day. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by illness, but when he saw her stepping out of the rental car, his face transformed into something that erased 40 years in an instant. "You came," he said, and his voice carried the same wonder she remembered from the night they first detected an anomalous signal from Proxima Centauri, excitement mixed with disbelief, as if the universe had just offered them something too precious to be real. "You asked," Olivia replied, climbing the steps slowly, her own heart hammering against her ribs. "You never asked before." They stood facing each other for a long moment, two people who had aged into strangers wearing the faces of people they once knew intimately. James's hair had gone completely silver, his frame thin beneath the blanket. Olivia knew she looked different too, her dark hair streaked with gray, lines around her eyes from years of squinting at computer screens and ocean horizons, her hands marked with age spots that hadn't been there when she last held his gaze. "I was a fool," James said finally. "I thought I was being noble, letting you build your career without the complication of us. I thought you'd find someone better." "I did find someone," Olivia said, surprising herself with the honesty. "He was kind and patient and deserved more than I could give him. Because apparently I'm just as much a fool as you are. I spent 40 years being angry at you for not staying, when I never once picked up the phone to call you." James smiled, and there was something both sad and relieved in it. "We're a pair, aren't we? Two brilliant people who could decode signals from across the galaxy, but couldn't figure out how to say, 'I love you,' when we were standing in the same room." The words hung in the air between them, finally spoken after 4 decades of silence. "Past tense?" Olivia asked quietly. "I don't know," James admitted. "Is it possible to love someone you haven't spoken to in 40 years? Or is that just loving a memory? I guess that's one of the things we're here to find out, Olivia said. Along with what the hell is on that hard drive you sent me. James laughed, then coughed, a wet rattling sound that made Olivia's chest tighten. Always practical. That's what I loved about you. Love, present tense. I checked. He stood carefully, the blanket falling away to reveal how much weight he had lost, and led her inside. The research station's interior was a strange combination of home and laboratory, comfortable furniture mixed with computer servers, bookshelves filled with both scientific journals and poetry collections, and walls covered with star charts and photographs. Olivia recognized some of them. The JPL team from 1984, the Voyager launch crew, the Arecibo telescope staff. And there, in a simple frame on his desk, was the photograph he had sent her. The two of them young and hopeful. Standing too close and not close enough. I kept it on my desk everywhere I went, James said, following her gaze. Madrid, Geneva, Tokyo, here. People assumed you were my wife. I never corrected them. Olivia felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice giving way to spring. Show me the signal. They worked through the night, falling into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. James had set up a comprehensive analysis suite, pulling data from multiple sources, the Arecibo telescope before its collapse, the Very Large Array, the Chinese Fast Telescope, even some satellite feeds she suspected were not entirely legal. The signal appeared consistently across all of them, a structured pattern that repeated every 47 hours, originating from a point roughly 1,200 light-years away in the constellation Cygnus. It's not binary, Olivia said around 3 in the morning, her eyes burning from staring at waveform displays. Everyone always assumes alien signals would be binary because it's universal, on or off, yes or no. But this is something else. Trinary, James suggested, bringing her coffee in a mug that read, I need my space, with a cartoon astronaut. She recognized it from their JPL days. She had given it to him as a birthday present in 1985. You kept the mug too? I kept everything that reminded me of you, he said simply. Which turned out to be nearly everything. Made packing for international moves a nightmare. Olivia took the coffee, their fingers brushing, and felt the same electric charge she remembered from 40 years ago. Some things apparently time couldn't diminish. Not trinary, she continued, forcing herself back to the work. Look at the intervals. They're not evenly spaced. It's more like music or poetry. Rhythm rather than code. James leaned closer, studying the screen. A language structure? Exactly. But not trying to communicate mathematics or physics. They're assuming we already understand those. This is something else. This is cultural, James finished. They're trying to share their culture. They worked for 3 more hours, breaking the signal into component parts, identifying patterns that suggested grammar and syntax. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they finally succeeded in isolating what appeared to be the signal's opening statement. James ran it through their modified translation algorithm, and words appeared on the screen, not exact translations, but close enough to make meaning clear. We are the Vestari. We are dying. Not in body, but in spirit. We have forgotten why we exist beyond existing. We seek stories of meaning. We seek hope. We seek connection. Can you hear us? Can you remember for us what it means to matter? Olivia sat back, tears streaming down her face without her permission. James reached for her hand, his fingers thin and cold, and she gripped them tightly. They're not asking for technology, she whispered. They're not threatening invasion. They're not even asking for help in any practical sense. They're asking for stories, James said. They're asking for what makes life worth living. They sat in silence as the sun rose fully, painting the research station in golden light, their hands still clasped together after 40 years of separation. James, Olivia said finally, we have a story like that. Don't we? He turned to look at her, his eyes, still the same warm brown she remembered, filling with understanding. You mean, 2 people who spent their whole lives searching for meaning in the cosmos, who built systems to listen for messages from impossible distances, who could decode anything except their own hearts, who wasted 40 years being afraid when they could have been brave. who got one last chance to be honest before time ran out. James squeezed her hand, and she felt the tremor in his grip that spoke of his illness, of time running short. You think that's the kind of story they need? I think, Olivia said, that it's the truest story we have. Not a story about heroes or perfection. A story about two ordinary people who were brilliant at everything except the most important thing, who finally, at the very end, decided to be honest about what mattered. A love story, James said softly. A human story, Olivia corrected. Messy and complicated and full of regret, but also full of hope. Because we got here, didn't we? Despite everything, despite 4 decades, despite... Her voice broke. Despite running out of time. James stood slowly, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her. He felt fragile, like he might break, but his embrace was still strong enough to hold her together as she cried against his shoulder. I love you, he said into her hair. I loved you 40 years ago, and I love you now, and I will love you with whatever time I have left. I'm sorry it took me dying to finally say it. I love you too, Olivia whispered back. And I'm sorry it took you dying for me to hear it. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, two people who had spent a lifetime studying the vast distances between stars, finally closing the distance between themselves. Outside, the antenna arrays continued their patient listening, waiting for humanity to figure out what message it wanted to send back. Inside, that message was beginning to take shape. The weeks that followed existed outside of normal time. James grew weaker. Some days he could barely leave his bed, other days he rallied with a determination that seemed to defy medicine itself. Olivia stayed, canceling her return flight, then canceling the thought of ever leaving. They worked when James had strength, and when he didn't, she sat beside him reading poetry aloud or simply holding his hand while he slept. They began crafting humanity's response to the Vistari with the same care they had once used to design communication protocols for Voyager. But this message would be different. This wouldn't be a greatest hits compilation of human achievement, no Beethoven symphonies or mathematical proofs or images of our finest monuments. This would be something rawer, truer, harder to send into the cosmos. This would be their story. Olivia wrote in the early mornings, sitting on the porch as the desert came alive with color, her laptop balanced on her knees. James edited in the afternoons when his mind was clearest, adding his own perspective, his own regrets. Together they constructed something that felt less like a transmission and more like a confession. Should we tell them about the first time we almost kissed? James asked one evening, his voice weak but amused. They were sitting together on his small couch, her head resting on his shoulder, a blanket covering them both against the desert chill. The Christmas party at JPL? When we both reached for the same glass of terrible punch and your hand touched mine and we just froze? And then Peterson from accounting walked by and made a joke about the mistletoe and we both laughed it off like it was nothing, James finished. Even though it was everything, we should tell them, Olivia decided. We should tell them that humans are terrified of the very thing we want most. That fear makes cowards of us all. James shifted slightly, wincing with pain. Olivia immediately sat up, reaching for his medication, but he waved her off. I'm fine. I want to be present for this. I've spent 40 years being absent. She settled back against him, more carefully this time. Tell me something I don't know. Something from all those years we were apart. I almost called you, James said quietly. Twice. Once in 1992 when I saw your paper on deep space signal degradation. It was brilliant, Olivia. It solved a problem I'd been wrestling with for months. I picked up the phone at 2 in the morning Madrid time. Calculated what time it would be in California. Dialed everything except the last digit. Why didn't you finish dialing? Because 6 years had passed. Because I thought you'd have moved on. Because I was afraid you'd answer and I'd hear happiness in your voice that didn't include me. He paused. When was the second time? 2003. I saw your name in a news article about the Columbia disaster. You were quoted about communication failures, about how we don't listen carefully enough to warnings. And I thought you might need someone to talk to, someone who understood. I got as far as finding your work number at ESA, but you didn't call. I was married then, to Michael. And it seemed cruel to both of us, to all three of us, to reach out when I couldn't offer anything except old memories. The cosmic joke, James said, is that all those years I spent telling myself you were better off without me, you were thinking the same thing. We could have saved decades if either one of us had been brave for just 5 minutes. Olivia lifted her head to look at him. We're being brave now. We're being desperate now, James corrected gently. Bravery is doing the scary thing when you still have time to lose. We're doing the scary thing when there's nothing left to lose. Does it matter? Does the timing make it less real? James considered this, his hand finding hers beneath the blanket. No, I suppose it doesn't. Love doesn't expire just because it took too long to admit. But I wish, God, Olivia, I wish we had decades ahead of us instead of months, weeks. She kissed him then, softly, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then we make these weeks matter more than some people make decades matter. They finished the message over the next 3 weeks. It told the story of 2 scientists who met in their 20s, brilliant and ambitious and completely unprepared for the intensity of their connection. How they had worked side by side for 7 years, solving problems no one else could solve, seeing the universe through each other's eyes. How they had fallen in love in the spaces between equations, in late nights at the lab, in stolen moments that they never had the courage to acknowledge. It told of James's departure, of the letter he wrote and never sent, of the career he built while carrying her memory like a wound that never quite healed. It told of Olivia's brief marriage, her gentle attempts to love someone else, her ultimate failure to forget the man who had chosen the stars over her, except he hadn't, not really. He had chosen what he thought was her happiness over his own. It told of 40 years of silence, of parallel lives that never quite intersected, of the cosmic improbability that brought them back together at the end, of a dying man finally brave enough to ask for help, and a woman finally brave enough to answer, and it told of these final weeks, of reconnection, of honesty, of love that had survived 4 decades of denial, of 2 people who had spent their lives listening to the universe, finally learning to listen to each other. It's not a happy ending, James said when they finished the final draft. He was in bed now, too weak to sit at the computer, so Olivia read it aloud to him. It's not an ending yet, she replied. And happiness, real happiness, isn't about fairy tale perfection. It's about finding meaning even when things are hard, especially when things are hard. You think the Vestari will understand that? I think any species intelligent enough to build interstellar communication is intelligent enough to understand regret and hope, and the desperate, defiant choice to love someone even when you know you're going to lose them. They sent the message on a Tuesday morning in late January. James insisted on being present, so Olivia helped him to his wheelchair and rolled him into the control room. The transmission would take 1,200 years to reach the Vestari. Neither of them would live to see if it was received, if it was understood, if it helped. But that, Olivia realized, was the point. That was the most human thing of all, creating something meaningful without guarantee of success or recognition. Sending a message into the void and trusting that someone, someday, might hear it and feel less alone. James pressed the transmission button with a trembling hand, and they watched as their story, encoded in electromagnetic waves, began its journey across the galaxy. "We did it," he whispered. "We did it," she agreed, kissing the top of his head. James died 3 weeks later, on a quiet morning when the desert was painted in shades of gold. He died in his own bed with Olivia beside him, holding his hand, reading him poetry by Mary Oliver about wild geese and announcements over and over of where they are going. His last words were, "Thank you for coming back." Her last words to him were, "Thank you for asking." The funeral was small, just Olivia and a handful of James's colleagues from various projects over the years. They buried him in a simple cemetery outside Santa Fe, under a sky so clear and dark that the stars seemed close enough to touch. Olivia stood at his grave long after everyone else had left, looking up at those stars, thinking about messages traveling through the void, about how long it takes for light to travel, about how love might be the same, something that persists long after its source has gone. She returned to Oregon, to her cottage by the sea, carrying with her James's journals, his photographs, and the mug she had given him 39 years ago. The cottage felt different now, not lonely exactly, but populated with absence, with the presence of someone who would never arrive. But she kept working. She continued monitoring the frequencies, maintaining the equipment James had built, watching for any response to their message. She knew intellectually that she would never see it. 1,200 years was an impossible span, and she was already 68 years old. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things. 5 months after James's death, on a June evening when the ocean was calm and the sunset painted everything in copper and rose, Olivia's equipment began signaling an anomaly. At first, she thought it was a malfunction. The readings made no sense. The signal pattern matched the Vistari frequency, but it was coming from much closer. Impossibly closer. She worked through the night, her heart hammering, her hands shaking as she isolated and amplified the signal. By dawn, she had decoded it and sat staring at her screen with tears streaming down her face. The message was simple, translated through the protocols she and James had developed. "We heard you. We have been traveling toward you for 300 years. We received your message before you sent it. Time moves differently at light speed. Your story saved us. We learned to hope again. We learned that meaning comes not from avoiding pain, but from choosing connection despite it. We learned what you taught us, that love transcends time, distance, logic. We are close now. We will arrive in your skies in 73 of your days. We are coming to say thank you. To tell you that your story, your ordinary, imperfect, beautiful human story, changed everything for us. Your James will not see this, but you will. And we hope you know, you were never sending your message into empty void. We were always listening." Olivia sat on her porch as the sun rose over the Pacific, the message displayed on her tablet, crying in a way she hadn't cried since James's funeral. They had been heard. Their messy, imperfect, too-late love story had traveled across the galaxy and saved a civilization, and the Vistari were coming. She thought about James, about how he would have reacted to this moment. He would have been making calculations immediately, figuring out how to prepare for first contact. He would have been excited, terrified, overwhelmed. He would have reached for her hand. She reached into empty air, felt the absence of his fingers, and smiled through her tears anyway. 73 days later, on a September evening that felt suspended between summer and fall, the ships arrived. They came quietly without fanfare or threat, 3 sleek vessels that descended slowly from the stars to hover over the ocean beyond Olivia's cottage. The entire world watched. Every news station, every phone camera, every telescope turned toward the Oregon coast. But the Vistari sent their first communication to one person. To the woman sitting on her porch, 88 years old now, wrapped in a blanket that had belonged to James, watching the impossible happen. The communication came through her old equipment, through systems she and James had built together 4 decades ago, maintained together in his final weeks, that she had kept running alone since his death. Dr. Hart, we come not as conquerors or even as visitors. We come as students. Your species creates stories that make existence matter. You love imperfectly. You fail beautifully. You reach for connection even when it costs everything. We traveled 300 years to say thank you. To say that your story with James echoes across our entire civilization now. Children learn your names. Artists create in your honor. Philosophers debate your choices. You became our legend. Not because you were perfect, but because you were perfectly human. And we needed to learn how to be perfectly ourselves. May we meet you? May we tell you what you and James have meant to us? Olivia typed her response with shaking hands, and when she sent it, she felt James beside her as clearly as if he had never left. Yes. Come meet me. I have so much to tell you about him, about us, about how ordinary people living quiet lives can create something extraordinary when they finally dare to reach for what they've always wanted. Come, let me tell you our whole story. The ships descended, slowly to the beach, their hulls glowing soft blue in the twilight. And Olivia Hart, retired engineer, widow of a love that took 40 years to acknowledge and 4 months to live, stood to greet them. She was crying again, but this time from joy, from wonder, from the impossible beauty of a universe that listened when you were brave enough to speak. I wish you could see this. James, she whispered to the empty air, to the stars, to the man who had asked her to come back and decode one last signal. And somehow, in the way that love persists beyond death, beyond time, beyond all reasonable physics, she knew that he could. Their story had become part of the universe itself. And the universe, it turned out, had been listening all along.